Hello everyone and welcome back to AP Bio with AP Playground. Today we're starting Unit 7 with Topic 7.1, Introduction to Natural Selection. Today we're going to describe the causes of natural selection, talking about Darwin's theory, and especially about how natural selection affects populations. Our suggested skill is Visual Representations 2A, describe characteristics of visual representations of biological concepts and processes. So first up, what is evolution? Evolution is the change in the heritable characteristics of biological populations over successive generations. And this means this is the change of characteristics or traits that can be inherited, so passed on from one generation to the next over time. So it's the change in traits over time. Simple way it's explained is descent with modification. So as you pass down traits to the offspring and as the population overall enters the next generation, there's going to be a slight change, and this is descent with modification. And it is a theory that explains the unity and the diversity of life. Unity because it shows and suggests that there was common ancestry and that over time each species evolved from that. There was a change in traits over time, but also the diversity of life. How do we have so many species and so many diverse populations of species? Well, because of evolution. There has been change to the populations over time. There are multiple arguments for how evolution occurs. And so the first idea was proposed by Lamarck, who lived from 1744 to 1829, and he suggested use and disuse, meaning that parts of the body that were used became stronger and larger, such as a giraffe. The neck of the giraffe was used, and as a result, it became a stronger neck, and the neck became longer because of how much use it got from the giraffe eating. And he proposed that you could inherit acquired characteristics. So your acquired traits can be directly passed down. For instance, the offspring of a weightlifter will immediately out of the womb have stronger muscles. Just because they're the offspring of the weightlifter. Now, this has been rejected, and the used explanation of evolution is Darwin's theory of natural selection. So Darwin lived after Lamarck. I mean, their timelines overlap for 20 years, but he took a trip to the Galapagos Islands on a ship called HMS Beagle, and he observed adaptations, which are heritable characteristics, so characteristics that can be passed down, that enhance an organism's ability to survive and reproduce in specific environments. And he observed the Galapagos finches, and he saw that on every single island there was a finch with a different beak. And so he started to think about why these finches would have different beaks, and he came to the conclusion that they were adaptations for the environment of that island, and in order to get the food that they needed, these finches had evolved and developed different beaks that helped them get the resources and that they needed to survive and reproduce and pass on their genes to the next generation. And Darwin's theory of natural selection explains how these adaptations arise, these characteristics that enhance an organism's ability to survive in an environment, and also as a whole, how populations evolve. And so natural selection follows these ideas. The members of a population vary phenotypically, so their outward appearance is different between members of a population. There's genetic variation within that population, and that's going to contribute to phenotypic variation as well. And so a species can often produce more offspring than environment can support. So there are going to be more individuals than the environment can support, and that's going to lead to competition between those individuals for necessary resources such as shelter, food, and water. But individuals with inherited traits that are better suited to the environment are more likely to get these resources and survive and reproduce. And so over time, what happens is there's an accumulation of favorable traits in the population. So over here in this picture, we can see giraffes. And we're going to be disproving Lamarck's theory of use and disuse here. So there are these tall trees, and they have obviously leaves at the top, and the shorter giraffes are unable to reach the leaves. And if the majority of the trees are of this height, that means that only giraffes that have a longer neck are going to be able to get the resources, the food they need to survive and then eventually reproduce. While the shorter giraffes, the ones that are unable to get resources, those are not going to survive long enough to reproduce. Their genes will not be passed down. So over time, the population is going to be made up of individuals who are adjusted and adapted to the environment, those with longer necks that can reach the leaves on the trees. So natural selection works. Certain traits are quote unquote selected for because they allow a population an organism to survive in the environment. And what happens over time as individuals with these organisms continue to survive and reproduce, the population is now going to reflect the majority of having these specific traits in it. Same thing over here with natural selection in action. And we see these mice of two different colors. They can either be black or sort of beige color. And it seems that the beige colored mice are more likely to be eaten because they cannot camouflage as well into the ground. And so what happens is the black mice are the ones that are going to be able to reproduce, pass on their genes, and those are going to be the ones that make up the majority of the population. So nature doesn't really make a choice here, but just by having the traits that allow them to survive better in an environment, these organisms are going to then reproduce and make up the majority of the population, resulting in change in the population over time. And we call the reproductive success of an individual in a population biological fitness. And of course, the goal of animals is to survive and reproduce. And so if you can reproduce, that means that the organism has high fitness. And this isn't dependent on strength and speed, although these factors can help an organism survive long enough in order to reproduce. But fitness is primarily based on whether or not an organism is able to reproduce. And environmental change can lead to adaptation to new conditions over time. So if the environment changes, that means an individual with a certain trait that may have been advantageous in the old environment is no longer advantageous. And now a different trait is going to be more beneficial. And so the organisms with that trait are the ones that are going to survive and reproduce. And so over time, the population is going to change. There's going to be a change in the overall genetic makeup. And the most important thing to note here is that populations evolve, not individuals. Over time, the makeup of a population can change, but the individual itself is not going to change. So, introduction to natural selection review. You got to know what evolution is. You have to know what natural selection is. That's literally the title of this unit. And every single other video in this unit is in some way going to connect to natural selection. And lastly, you should know what biological fitness is. All right, that was 7.1. We'll see you in 7.2.